I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Marshall Ma, who joined the University of Idaho in 2016 as an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science, although I've recently learned we could have had him in the College of Science, but we failed to capitalize on that. He got his PhD from a university in the Netherlands that I don't think I can pronounce. And I also just learned that he has 2 PhDs, one from the Netherlands and one from China. So yikes. And then a postdoc at the, boy, help me out, Marshall, how do you pronounce that Polytechnic Institute?
Rensselaer.
Yeah, that one. Marshall is a very talented data scientist that works in actually several different domains that I think you're going to hear about in this talk. But the piece of recently very exciting news is that he is the new principal investigator of a new NSF EPSCoR Track-2 award worth about $6 million. And you might be familiar with, this is the same kind of an award that Marty Itterberg is a PI of. And this award is about ticks and tick-borne diseases and the modeling and data science of that topic. And it brings together a pretty exciting team of collaborators from University of Idaho, University of Nevada, Reno, and Dartmouth in New Hampshire. So I'm sure you're going to hear about that as well. And just so everybody knows, I'm going to hand it off to Marshall, and then I'm going to leave the seminar so that I can go represent that Track-2 award to the statewide EPSCoR committee in a concurrent meeting. So I'll have to duck out. But anyway, Marshall, thanks for agreeing to do this, and take it away.
Thanks a lot, Barry, for the kind introduction. So today I'm going to, so first, I'm really happy and honored to be invited to give IBEST lunch talk. I've heard about IBEST and IMCI for a long time. It's always an idea in my mind to have some interactions with this wonderful community. I know this can lead to a lot of collaboration in research and other activities. So that's why today I'm very happy to share my research experience in the past 10 years on provenance documentation and also the so-called reproducible science. And I'll talk briefly on 3 parts. One part is with some details in the Global Change Information System, the GSAS project in the US GSASP, US Global Change Research Program. We did this project about 6 years ago together with a report. That's a very important output from US GSASP. And then the second part is some other people's work, including a research project in Spain about how to capture metadata and provenance in workflow platforms, and another research project at University of Münster in Germany. They also try to capture provenance in the workflow of spatial statistics. They've done some really interesting work. And then I will also share just briefly a list of some ongoing initiatives, programs, projects in the United States and also in other countries. They all share the same topic, provenance and reproducibility. And at the end of the talk, I will just give a short introduction to the Track project. Barry just mentioned it. We also planned some provenance documentation work in the Track-2 project. But since we just started the project 2 months ago, so I don't have research outputs to present, but I will just give you a quick idea about what is our vision, what is our plan, and then something interesting we plan to do in this Track-2 project. So let me continue. The first is the GSAS project. GSAS is a data portal initiated by US GSASP. US GSASP is a really big research program in the United States. It's mandated by the Congress, I think back to the 1990s. The US government spent a lot of money in it. I just checked the GSASP website. In the past, on average, in the past 10 years, every year the government spent about $2.5 billion in this program. And then the budget was distributed to several federal agencies, including their daily expense on research and activities, and also including, for example, research grants to NSF, and also to agencies, for example, the Smithsonian Institution for Education and Outreach Activities. And altogether, you can see there are 13 federal agencies involved in the GSASP, and they do have administrative structure. And this tiny box with the red boundary, that's a research project for which I was a postdoc back to 7 or 6 years ago when I was at Rensselaer Polytechnic. So in that time, GSASP was working on the third round of National Climate Assessment Report. The short name is NCA. NCA is like the most important scientific output from GSASP. And it's also written in the code of the Congress for GSASP. They said every 4 or 5 years, GSASP needs to release an NCA report based on the research work in the past 4 or 5 years. And then for NCA 3, the third round of National Climate Assessment, the leadership of GSASP, they said, okay, at this time, we want to release the report, not only as a document, we also want to release the data set and the tools and other provenance information. Provenance means the origin, right? The origin of something. So for NCA is the origin of the scientific findings, the origin of some conclusions or scenarios you can see in the report. They saw this is very important for government decisions and also for researchers and also for the general public to track, okay, what you have done in NCA and how you draw this conclusion. So in that time, we set up this small research grant, and they found us, GSASP found us as a collaborator to work on this data portal. And our fundamental work in this is develop we call it ontology. You can also think it as a data model for this information system, GSAS. And here is the scientific background. So how we built this data model or the ontology for GSAS. GSAS, as reported, is a huge database, but it also has some unique characteristics. So as you can see, GSAS is the data portal for NCA and also for GSASP. But GSAS did not capture the data set. They did not archive the data set. Instead, they captured the metadata for those data sets used in the National Climate Assessment. You see, there are more than 1,000 TB data sets used in NCA 3, but on GSAS, no data set was archived, only the metadata of those data sets. But also, we capture not only the metadata for data set, as I said, we want the prevalence. It's like the workflow. So it's a data set and also the instruments used to capture the data set, the platform where this instrument was installed, sensors used in the instrument, and also the host institution of those instruments and the platforms, and also for scientific conclusion, what method was used to analyze the data set, and then which software program, and also which machine, and who is the researcher. So there are all those kinds of objects. It's not only about data set, but also all those different objects in the scientific activities of NCA 3, which leads to the scientific findings presented in the report. So in our work, we think this is a good chance to use the semantic web technologies to do the conceptual modeling. And we see there can be 4 parts of fundamental work when we build the data portal. One part is a category, and then there's classes for different objects in those NCA activities. And then the second part is annotation. we need models, we need attributes, we also need a structure to describe each object, each category of objects. And then we need a mechanism to assign unique and persistent identifiers to all those objects. If you're familiar with DOI for papers or publications, here the identifier concept is very similar to DOI for papers, but it's broader. We want identifiers not only for papers, but for all those different types of objects. And then the final part is linking across all those objects. And then in that way, we can document the complete provenance information in the scientific activities of NCA. In that way, we can present this complete information to decision makers and also to the public. And the whole idea is reflected in this diagram. I reuse it from the Nature website. So on the very top, you can see like a piece of paper. You can think it as the NCA3 report. And then below it, you can see the spiral. I think this can be used to represent all those different objects and resources that lead to the final output of the NCA3 report. So here are some details about how we develop the model for the GSAS, especially for the NCA3. You can see NCA3, and that time is, so back to 2014, before its formal release, I think at the end of 2014, when we begin to do the data modeling, is still a draft, but the US GSAP office shared the draft to us, and we can see there are a lot of authors, a lot of pages, a lot of chapters, a lot of those figures, images, tables, and then data sources mentioned, and also the plausible scenarios generated as findings or recommendations from the report. This is a huge report, and I remember some time ago, Barry even made a kind of joke on this. So you can see it's around 1,000 pages, this report. And this represents 5 years of US GSAP work. So on average, each page in this report represents about $10 million of scientific expense. So we need to be careful about this report, and then we need to show authoritative resources, authoritative procedures that lead to the result presented on each page. So we must be very careful. So that's why the leadership in US GSAP draw out this anticipation or just their vision for the provenance documentation. For NCA3, because in that time, we have only about 1 year to do the data model and then to set up like a pilot system for the GSAS. So they give us a very focused topic. You say, okay, if you can finish at the end of 1 year, if you can finish the target of traceable sources, then that's a very good result. And then if you can also do something about traceable data, that will be even better. But then after that, traceable processes and the traceable tools, we can set this as the long-term goals, maybe for the next round of NCA report, NCA4 or NCA5. So, and then along those steps, you can see it's a process from transparency to reproducibility. So first is a transparency to sources, data set, and then you can also capture information about workflows, processes, and even the tools and the person who running the tools to get the results. So it's also kind of objective for reproducibility. And then the work I did exactly for the GSAS is the data model, as I mentioned. We call it ontology because we use the semantic web technologies. It's a formal representation of those classes, properties, and different types of concepts, objects in the GSAS system. And then by that time, by 2014, we did a lot of survey, and we also discuss and present this work to different communities. And we are confident to see this is the first ontology for provenance documentation in the earth and the environmental sciences. And we even published a paper on Nature Climate Change about this work. And but that is not the key point. The key point is this ontology was used in the GSAS data portal. And the website is still there. It's data.globalchange.gov. That's the official site for GSAS. And I just did a check yesterday, and I'm very happy. So the GSAS ontology was used not only for the NCA3 released in 2014, it was also used in NCA4, that's a report released in 2018. And now they are also using it for capturing the provenance information in NCA5. So if you go to this website, I think it's user-friendly. And if you don't know anything about climate change or impacts of climate change, you can still find something interesting. But for information scientists or data scientists, this website and also the GSAS research group, they also give you an API and interface to access and to do some kind of data mining with the backend. At the backend, they have a database supporting this front-end website. So if you know how to use the API they provide, you can also do some other kind of applications. And here is something we can do with the capture provenance. For example, we can do some integrated data mining. For sure, you can also do some provenance searching. You can also even do some measurement about metrics of scientific outputs or some other kind of metric measurements. For example, you can ask, show me all the NASA contributions to the NCA sea level rise figures. You can also do some search, for example, which agencies have people working on projects related to the social impacts of extreme weather events, and all those kind of data mining. You can also call it a metadata mining. Okay. And I will show you one example about how, especially as just as a general public, not a scientist, what I can do with this website. And here is an example about the sea level rise figure in the draft NCA3. This figure is very important. It's about the sea level rise. And then you can see based on, if you have the draft report, you will see this figure is based on several data sources, and they use a lot of computational models to generate this scenario. This figure is very important because different federal agencies, based on this figure, they may change or update the plans, and also this also related to a lot of public budget expense on the preparation or on their plans. So people may be interested, both the general public and also decision makers, they may be interested to see how this figure was generated. And then on our website, even without any data mining or data searching techniques, if you just go to our website, the GSAS, you can still do some interesting search by just doing mouse clicks. So first, if you come to the website, you can see a link to the third National Climate Assessment. And you can see there are a lot of figures. If you come here, you can see a list of all those figures. And here is a figure for the sea level rise. It's used as 1.12. It's also used as 2.26. So I just come here. And then if you come to the page for this figure, you can see this figure was derived from or based on several existing research. It's kind of a reference to the existing publications. We can go to any one of them. Here is I just click one of them, and you can see some information about that article. And then we can see this article was derived from a data set. And then we can go to the page for the data set, and then the data set we can see is not the raw data set. Again, is the refer from 3 other data sets. And then we can go to one of them. And now we can see this data set was captured by an instrument installed on the Topics Poseidon and platform. That's a satellite. And then we can also go to the page for that platform. And then here we can see, okay, this platform was hosted by the Aeronautics Agency in the United States and also in France by those 2 agencies. And in this way, we can see what is NASA's contribution to the sea level rise figure. And then we can, for sure, we can also go to the web page of NASA, and here you can see a lot of links, including other organizations related to NASA, other instruments hosted by NASA, and also other kind of links. So this is, you can see when I go through all those pages, what I need to do is just mouse click. But then for information scientist or data manager, if you are interested to explore, or if you are interested to develop some other types of applications, this website also allows you to access the source code for each object. And now this website is still under maintenance, and I know they still have a team working on this. And just in the recent 2 weeks is the AGU conference, American Geophysical Union conference. And I also had a number of presentations about US GSASP and NCA5. And also this website is still in use for the NCA5. Okay. And here I want to present you an item in even more details. It's a kind of challenge we face in capturing the provenance. I call it the granularity of provenance capture or provenance documentation. Means how much details do we need, the granularity of provenance. So when we capture the information or the metadata, the description about objects, normally we have different levels of details, right? And then for NCA3, that's back to 6 years ago, the requirement we received is, for this example, I can give you the example here is, for example, we take out a chapter in the NCA3 report, okay? Similar to a scientific paper, we have a number of authors, right? And then if you think this activity, if you think, okay, chapter 6 in the NCA3 report as an entity, and then each author of another chapter will be an agent, and then the writing of another chapter will be an activity, okay? And then the interesting thing in NCA3 is that for authors, there are different types of authors, actually similar to a journal paper. In a journal paper, you may see corresponding author, first author, second author, and other third author, fourth author. The same thing in NCA3, but just the title is a little bit different. They are convening lead author, contributing author, and other types of authors. So the requirements we receive is that we also need to capture those types of roles for researchers in the writing of a chapter. So how we do that? This challenges us a lot, but finally we found a solution by reusing a community standard called a Prevalence ontology. It's a community standard developed in the World Wide Web Consortium. That's the consortium for the World Wide Web standards. And we found this, it's a really interesting model. They do give us method to capture the roles of people in an activity and also the roles of people to an entity. So if you look at those two diagrams, you can see how is the mechanism to be used to capture the role of an agent. You can think a person as an agent. So how can we capture the role of an agent to an entity or to an activity? For example, here, if you think that chapter as an entity, and then we can use the prof attribution object in the middle to capture the role of a person to that entity. So this is the same thing. If you think about ourselves, I believe each of you in the audience is a faculty member or a researcher or a student related to maybe University of Idaho or another institution. So, for example, assistant professor, I'm an assistant professor, but is assistant professor my essential, or person is my essential? I think person is my essential. Assistant professor is maybe just my role. Hopefully I can get promoted next year. So if I get promoted next year, then assistant professor is just my role for University of Idaho. I know sometimes the role has a kind of time duration. So my role as an assistant professor for University of Idaho will be in the duration of 2016 to 2022. So the same thing. If you are a student, if you are an undergraduate student at the University of Idaho, that role may take just 4 years. If you are a PhD student at the University of Idaho, that role may take just 4 years or 5 years. So this is the interesting topic of granularity in provenance documentation. So how to show the details. If you really want to show this in details, we have this mechanism, we have this way to show the details. And sometimes if you only want a very rough model, and you see you don't want to identify the role of a person to another entity or to another activity. Sometimes it's also okay. You can define student not as a role, but as a class. And sometimes you can also define professor as a class, not as a role. That is also allowable if you only want a rough ontology or a rough data model for capturing the prevalence. That's also okay. Depends on the real world needs. But here, just in GSAS, they want us to show exactly the detailed level of roles and to capture the prevalence. So that's why we use this model to realize that purpose. So in that way, for that chapter 6 in NCA3, we are able to capture the role of authors for that chapter. As you can see, for this person, name is Jane Taker, campaigning lead author, and then another person lead author, and another person contributing author. So I will capture this in details. So some people may feel this is redundant, especially some data managers. This is so redundant. Why you make this so complicated? But again, as I mentioned, this is based on the real world needs. Because NCA3 is a governmental report, and it's based on a huge research budget, and they do have the need to show these types of details. And that's why we make the data model in this way, to show the details. So that's the work we did for NCA3. And then next, I will give a brief introduction to two other interesting works in Europe. The first one is called a mathclip. This is a research project done in Spain. And then their scope is focused on workflow platforms, especially the R environment. In nowadays, many researchers are using workflow platforms including, for example, R Markdown, Jupyter Notebook, R Studio. And then in this research, their scientific background is still climate change, but then they have a focus in capturing the metadata and preference information in a scientific workflow. And what they did is a really interesting topic. They first developed a ontology. It's also like a data model for different types of objects in the workflow. For example, a step, a scientific package, an R package, functions in the package, data set they import into the R environment, parameters in the data set, and then the derived data set, and then scientific result, for example, an image or a table or those kind of objects. So first they have a data model, and second they also develop a library, including functions in the library to capture the metadata. You can also call it a preference along with each option. When you do the R coding, for example, import a data set, load a library, perform a and also call a function from a library and perform a data analysis or data operation. And then against which parameters in which data set, they can capture all those information because they have the ontology. So the captured information is also structured. And now comes the really interesting operation they finally did. They can capture the preference in machine readable format is JSON LD, JSON linked data. And then in the workflow, if the output is, for example, an image in JPEG or in PNG format, and then they can append or they can just attach that piece of JSON LD preference information in a secret place inside the image file. So it's still an image. You can open it in an image browser, but somewhere inside the source code of the image, there is a piece of JSON LD. And that's the preference about the workflow used to generate this piece of image. It's a really interesting operation. And then they also develop a endpoint, a front end, allowing users, if you have such an image generated in such a workflow, and when you drag and drop an image to their front end, they have some functions to read that JSON LD inside the image and visualize it. So here, like what you see on this slide, you can see like a graph, right? With a number of steps and then the associated objects, for example, data source, and then other packages imported, and then functions in the packages used to do the data analysis, and finally, the output image. And also, if you do a mouse click for each load in this graph, and also a mouse click on each edge or the relationship in this graph, you can see the details. And this is written in RDF because it's JSON LD. So you can also see this is consistent with the linked open data environment and also the semantic web. So this is a really interesting work. And if you compare this with what we did in GSAS, it's a little bit different, right? Their focus is on the workflow platform. And then their focus is capturing the preference when the scientific finding or when the scientific output is being generated. They can capture preference exactly when the workflow is ongoing. And then in GSAS is a little bit different. Is we already finished all the work, and then the draft report is almost there. And then at that time, we begin to capture the preference. So actually in GSAS, back to 5 years ago, there were also some discussions saying, okay, why we only begin to capture the preference after the work is already done? Why we do not capture the preference when the scientific work is ongoing? So I think the mathclip projects can offer some tips or some sorts if we are going to do some more work for the preference documentation in GSAS. And another project in Europe I want to present to you is this one called a Meaningful Spatial Statistics. And the scope of the work is also similar to mathclip. They want to use ontology in the R environment. Because I read their reports, so their focus is also exactly the R environments, but they focus exactly on the spatial statistics method. So they have ontology for different types of data sets with spatial characteristics. And also they have the model for the different types of spatial statistical methods. And then the general idea or the background of this work is that different types of spatial data sets, they are corresponding methods that can be used to analyze them. So the idea is that if you load a spatial data set into the R environment, by using their ontology, they will be able to tell you what is the best method, or what is a better method to be used to analyze the data set. So if you load a different function trying to analyze data set, that ontology may give you some tips or just some messages to see this is not the best way to begin to analyze the data set. So this is the general idea. I saw one of their post presentation. I think that's back to 2015 or 2016. And then I came to know their website. And also yesterday, I just came to check. I want to see, are there any new progress on the website? The website is still alive, but when I go there, I see there were no new updates about this work in the past 5 years. And I checked the first author. At that time, he was a PhD student and a postdoc. Since he found a faculty job at the University of Utrecht, maybe his time is limited, so there were no new progress on this initiative in the past 5 years. But still, this is a kind of really interesting idea. It's also related to capturing provenance, and also some kind of interesting, you can call it artificial intelligence or machine or knowledge-added operations in workflow platforms. Okay. And then lastly, I just want to give you a brief introduction. So besides those 3 projects I just showed you, there are also a few other initiatives, small or big, and they are all relevant to provenance documentation. The first is a small initiative in the Earth Science Information Partners community. It's called a tool match, trying to match data sets, different types of data sets with different types of tools. And there are also some many web works on this initiative. The second is a research program. I think this one was just complete 1 or 2 years ago. It's called a QA for ECV, Quality Assurance for Essential Climate Variables. They also build a data portal to show the provenance of those ECVs. ECV, I don't know whether ECV is a concept also used in the United States, but I think this concept is very popular in the European Union. And this website showed some really interesting work to capture the workflow when they generate some result about ECVs. If you do a Google search about QA for ECV, you may find some demos on their website. The last one is a platform called GeoWave. This is a research project led by a postdoc at George Mason University with some initial funding from ESIP, Earth Science Information Partners. And just 1 month ago, this project received a grant from NASA Access program. And the idea is to, again, is to capture provenance in workflow platforms. But now they put the workflow platform in the cloud environment. And I will be the co-PI on this project. So hopefully we can also do something interesting in the next 3 years. So lastly, I may use 5 or 4 minutes to give a brief introduction to the Track-2 project. So as you see, Provenance and Prevalence documentation together with semantic web, that's my research interest. So I also include Provenance documentation as a part of this Track-2 project. This is a long-term project for the next 4 years. It's a collaborative effort between U of I, University of Nevada, Reno, and also Dartmouth College. We want to use big data to improve the study of tick-borne disease patterns and dynamics, because it's a problem of national importance. Although on the West, it may not be a very serious issue just based on what we hear about the reported tick-borne disease, the reported cases. But we saw this can be a serious issue. So that's why we want to do this research. We have collaborators from 3 universities, and then with those complementary expertise in different disciplines, including entomology, epidemiology, ecology, biology, if you see this onion diagram on the right. And also we have experts in climate, geography, socioeconomics, and also since we're going to use big data and also some new data science tools, we also have experts in cyber infrastructure, data science, algorithms, and we're going to do some outreach and education and activities. We do have the plan to develop a video game about ticks and the tick-borne disease, and Barry will be the lead for that effort. So what is the potential for Provenance research? We can take a quick look on the diagram. This diagram on the right, this is the scientific background for the Track-2 project. So we can say absolutely climate change has impact on all those interacting factors in the tick-borne disease dynamics, including both the biology side and also the geographical side. So climate change has impacts on the ecosystem, landscape, and also the population of ticks, and also the generation and the evolution of pathogens. And then on the other side, climate change also has impact on human behaviors, for example, the outdoor activities, and also the socioeconomics. And all those coming together, they all have some kind of impacts in the exposure pathways. And then finally is the health outcomes. So it's a complicated system, but as a conceptual model, when I see the complicated system, I'm very happy, because that means we can do something for the modeling and also for the preference documentation. And then our general approach, I think, includes those 3 parts: data, model, and pattern. For the data, we're going to create an advanced framework, including data collection from both federal agencies and also crowdsourcing websites, and also other sources. And then we're going to use workflow platforms, including Jupyter and the R environments. And then in network, we can do the preference documentation. And for sure, we're also going to have algorithms to tackle the incomplete data set, sparse data set. We're also going to have algorithms and models for spatial temporal analysis. And finally, we're going to identify the change patterns in the tick-borne importation rules, the pathogen evolution, and also the tick-borne disease dynamics. So personally, I can see a lot of potential for preference research if we are going to take this approach, data model and patterns. And finally, to conclude my presentation, I want to share with you this short blog written by Professor Wayne. She listed 10 research challenges for data science, maybe in the next decade. And when I look through those 10 items, I can see many of them actually, they are related to preference documentation. But if you ask me to take just one, I would say trustworthy AI will be the best one to match the work we are doing in preference documentation. There's also another name for trustworthy AI. It's called explainable AI, which is a very popular topic, just raised up in the recent 2 years in the domain of computer science and artificial intelligence. So hopefully through the Track-2 research, we can also make some contribution to the data science theories and methods. Yeah, with that, I will end my presentation. Again, thanks a lot for your time. And if you have any questions or comments, I'll be happy to answer them and discuss with you.
I really enjoyed that talk. Thank you very much. My question is, it seems like anytime you develop a standard, that standard changes. So how do you build these kinds of ontologies to be able to adapt to changing standards, and which metadata are important, or different technologies, etc.?
Yes, thank you, Amanda. So when we develop ontologies, we see a few levels of ontologies, because each ontology is a model, right? And it's like a hierarchical structure, classes, subclasses, and superclasses, and that's true. So, and I know maybe your question is related to, oh, you mentioned preference capture in so many different disciplines. So when you build models, how can you easily go through all those different disciplines? So, so in ontology development, we do have some really upper level ontologies. As I showed you, for example, W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, they do have a really upper level preference ontology. And there are 3 top level classes in that model. Is the entity, agent, and the activity. It's very general, but it's very powerful. We can use it to describe almost everything in the world: agent, activity, and then what is the other one? Entity. So, and then for sure, in different disciplines, we need to see the real world needs for that discipline and for certain research projects. But still, we can reuse a lot of existing ontologies. We do have some community standards. Thank you.
Anyone else before we finish up?
Yes, I'm curious. Hi, thanks. That was really interesting. I'm curious about the more about the tick project, and I'm wondering about how good the data is for that. I could see there being quite a bit of like epidemiological data for that, but what about like how do you? I know nothing about this kind of stuff, so I'm curious about how like you incorporate really specific data, like say what strains of bacteria are in different ticks in different regions, that where the data is probably embedded in like papers or something like that. Like I don't understand how you pull in that data if it's not, you know, in an existing database, for example.
Yeah, thanks, James. So when we develop the proposal, we do see there can be several types of data sources. The first for sure is those well-organized data set from the government agencies, including NASA, USGS, especially those related to geospatial data sets, and also for the specific tick population and also reported tick-borne disease cases, we can use CDC and also some state agencies for the data source. And for sure, we can also use crowdsourcing data sets, for example, reported cases, images from social media like Twitter or some other kind of platforms. But recently, we also begin to discuss we need to be careful when we do those kind of work. So we do have the plan to build a data portal to capture all those available data sets that can be used to study tick-borne disease. And then again, we're thinking about the idea, do we really need to capture all the data set, or do we just need to capture the metadata of these data sets? Because the data set, they may be updating. So this is one idea. And then the second, yes, we also have the plan to capture historical data sets from published literature. A collaborator in this project, he's a computer science faculty in University of Nevada, Reno. He has the plan in the proposal to develop a tool to capture data set from literature. And then that can also be used.
Cool. So that's neat. So you specifically mentioned evolution. So I was kind of curious if you were going to try to like pull in sequencing data from NCBI or something like that, or if that's completely outside the plans.
Yeah. So I have almost no knowledge in biology and tick pathogens and also tick-borne disease pathogens. So that's just our plan, and we still have 4 years. So let's see what will happen. And also from my own experience, especially related to data collection and then those data-intensive research, in my mind, the plan is we do not need to capture all the data sets before we do the research. Instead, from my side, I would recommend to do scientific question-focused data collection. It's like a use case by use case. In that way, we can get a better understanding about what is exactly the data needs. And then step by step, we can also present successful stories. And then at the final end, we may not present people a very complete database showing everything in it, but at least we can show a number of successful use cases. We can also show the needs, the real needs from the scientists, and also we can make recommendations about what we need to capture in the database. And our plan is to make it an open portal, so hopefully we can set a really good data structure and then make it like a kind of community efforts. And then being there for a long time, everyone can be a data contributor and everyone can be a data user.